Hello and welcome to Conversations about Language Teaching. I am your host, Dr. Reed Riggs, he, him.
And I am your other host, Dr. Diane Neubauer, she, her. And today I think we have a topic already in mind, but haven't begun yet. So we were going to talk about what is often called focus on form.
Yeah, but I like that how you said what is often called. And it's really not about we'll talk about the term, but there are other terms, and we're really talking about the idea it refers to and how this can be useful for teaching in classrooms and really thinking about, to me, it's thinking about the nature of language usage as well.
Mhm.
We haven't talked about
Yeah,
who's going to lead this
so,
episode.
I figured this one we'll collaborate it.
All right,
How's that?
see how that goes.
I don't know. I wonder if listeners ever can tell if one of us is supposedly introducing the topic. I mean, a few times, like
Mm,
I
mhm,
brought an
mhm.
article and we talked about one that you hadn't read and that kind of thing. But
Okay,
anyway,
go ahead.
we both know something and have some opinions. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think should we do a little bit of a definition first, maybe from those
Yeah.
who've coined that term,
Hmm.
and then we'll talk about like, okay, this kind of connects to that, that kind of connects to it, that kind of connects to it.
Sure, sure.
So my sense is that researchers and second language acquisition researchers like Patsy Lightbown and Michael Long, maybe in the 90s or so,
I think
were
80s.
trying.
Yeah, we got to link it
80s,
in show
okay,
notes. We'll
as
look
early
it
as that.
up.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So they were trying to address the thing because SLA research was kind of developing and the idea of comprehensible input was out there. Then there were others, Michael Long being one, like interaction was important, and then others saying that also we needed to have output, and there kind of these swirling things. But the elephant in the room is kind of, but traditionally in language teaching, thinking was that they needed to study about the forms of the language. They needed to
Sure.
understand the grammar patterns. They
Yeah.
needed to learn rules. They needed to
Yeah.
practice rules.
Sure.
And that if they do that, they would gain this language ability. And so I think the focus on form people are trying to resolve the issue of, how much does a learner really need to consciously understand about the way the
Yeah.
language supposedly works?
Sure.
And how much is that helpful and when and why and how to maybe carry it out. Again, I've kind of conflated second language acquisition research with language teaching
Sure.
and language teaching applications of that research.
Yeah.
So keeping in mind that there could be, out in the world in any setting, this may or may not be something
Yeah.
we see learners
Well,
do,
there's
but in classrooms, then there might be practices that are
yeah.
common.
Let me add to that as well, sort of the more pure science additionally. So yes and to what you're saying. That there's also the question of just what is going on in the mind, like what is the brain doing? And so the question
Yeah,
of a role for consciousness, a role for, if we're going to say that language is structured in any way, then does it impact processing and learning to tell learners about that structure?
right.
And so that's sort of a general question of focus on form. So yeah, Michael Long kind of came up with this distinction that I've heard. It's often mentioned with a little criticism about how he labeled them, which was
Yes.
focus on form. There was focus on meaning, focus on
Yeah.
form, and then focus on forms with an S at the end.
Yeah.
And it
And a
was
very
the
huge difference between those last two,
yeah,
even though they sound totally the
right,
same,
right.
almost, unless you're really listening closely.
Well, the
So,
problem that I think it caused, we'll define them too, but by making the middle one, making focus on form sound so similar to focus on forms, that people will jump on that and treat it as if it's focus on forms. And it's
right. I
really
think that's
important
true.
to see not the name, but what it refers to, what it's talking about. So, is it okay if I
Yeah, go
describe
for it.
these? Okay.
Yeah.
So, I can't think of focus on forms outside of classroom, how teachers do it. I don't. I guess
Yeah.
in a laboratory experiment, if you're just testing a whole bunch of people and teaching them an artificial language, maybe this has probably been done. I'm not familiar with teaching grammar rules. No, I have seen it. They do this in, I think, psycholinguistic studies, where they'll say there's this little pattern that we've created for this artificial language. We'll have a group where we tell them what that pattern is, and then another group where we don't tell
Mhm.
them what the pattern is, and we'll see who seems to learn this pattern better. And in those really
Right.
constrained, really simple, like those
Yeah.
types of things are so simple and
Very
uniform, very
targeted
targeted. Yeah,
and,
it's like I taught the
and
thing,
short
yeah,
term
short term, yeah,
and measured in a certain way.
sure.
And there's all these kind of stipulations to it, but
But and it did,
different from the
yeah.
way that people actually are, I think.
When it's different from how complex natural human languages are. So there's a big gap there. But anyways, let's get back to our definitions of focus on form versus focus on forms. So focus on forms, Michael Long was referring to kind of that. It was telling people what this pattern or rule is, and then showing lots of different examples of it. I guess that's where the plural part comes in. But it was
Maybe
really
so.
that's the pure what we would think of as focus on the grammar of the language or the pronunciation pattern or
Mhm.
whatever the structure is. The
Yeah.
you're telling
Maybe
them what that structure is. Yeah,
maybe the verb endings and
sure.
focusing attention on that and
Yeah,
analyzing that,
yeah,
not for meaning, but for like now when do like it's a little different. It's like there's incidental reference to meaning, but it's really about something about now you should do this then and this there, and
yeah,
like it's at a step up from just communicating. It's analyzing language or
sure.
thinking about it.
So you could say focus on forms is referring to purely focus on the form of the language, which
Hmm.
but then let's use the term focus on form without the S.
Yeah.
And that's the one where he said, well, that's where you're focused on, you're pointing out to the learner the immediate form in its immediate context and the immediate meaning that it has in that context. And
Yeah.
so that's focus on form. And so what you have is a whole several decades of research literature saying, oh, here's we studied focus on form, and it's really easy to misread and say, oh, hey, they found positive outcomes. Therefore, we do need to teach grammar in our language classrooms. We do need to explicitly teach these things, and
Mhm.
that's kind of not what that idea was getting at. So I find it to be a
Right.
problematic label in its impacts on what people have assumed it refers to.
Again, yeah. Yeah. And I think that focus on form idea then is that it's something that arose during some sort of use of language communicatively. There's maybe, I think in the way that like a Patsy Lightbound carrying out of this, she's thinking about a developmental readiness for this attention. And, what does that exactly mean? How can you tell that that's happening? I have some questions there,
Sure.
but the idea that maybe, the learner does not develop this grammatical accuracy, the verb ending proper use at the proper time without any error, quote errors. That it's not, they're not saying that if you point this out to the learner in that moment where that comes up, they're naturally and absolutely going to then adopt that
Right.
either. So unlike I think a focus on forms with the S, that kind of a belief would be that, oh yeah, that's what you can expect from a learner. And so I think it's like that sense of like this developmental readiness, this at a point where the language is in use about, sometimes I think even like you noted, like, what does this mean in this context?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we see the N at the end of a Spanish verb, we can remember, oh, it means that they're doing it. It's more than one person doing it,
Hmm.
right?
That's at least what
I
it was
think
when we
my
saw it in
Spanish,
this
yeah.
moment. Sure, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, not drawing it out to be this universal thing now. Now go apply it,
Yeah.
practice doing it. It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
noting this thing does that thing there. So it's really tied in closely to meaning, I
Yeah.
think. I think though the focus on form researchers like Patsy Lightbound and Michael Long, I think would allow for a fairly long amount of time and attention on that in
Sure.
that moment.
I see.
Right? Like, a 10-minute lesson,
Okay.
maybe. Is that right? Do
I
you,
think
that's
I've
my
se-
impression.
I've seen that in other places. What was the name of that actful? There was an actful thing where you kind of tell a story, but at the end of it, you do a little 10-minute segment about some structural
Yeah,
thing in the
something that they
language.
were supposed to have noticed. It's PACE. I'm
Pace.
not going to get the
That's right.
abbreviation it stands for, right? But
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
idea is that you're intending for students to notice some kind of form of the language, but you're introducing it more inductively by kind of showing them multiple examples that are tending towards that, even though there's sort of a
Yeah.
communicative thing going on too. It's a little bit it's if you're going to have to teach grammar points like your school or your
Yeah.
syllabus says you have to get this now, I think it's maybe the best way to go about it,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think that's the ideal. We
Yeah.
don't want to have to track with, now we have to introduce this grammar right now, and then they need to get it so
Sure,
that we
sure.
can move on to the next grammar, no matter
Yeah.
how you're introducing that kind of thing. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Well, those are our opinions.
yeah,
I take a pretty strong complexity perspective on language form, especially when it comes to using language, that whatever pattern you're teaching, no matter how appropriate it is for this present context, um, your students will point out that it'll come up later and they'll say, wait, it doesn't. Oh, just yesterday, we were listening to an IB listening audio for a real IB exam for the Mandarin. And there's a point where the guy said, 你会听到, two people talking in a restaurant. So it's like, and my student said, oh, they said you can hear two people talking in a restaurant. And I said, oh, 会 here means will. And he gave me this
yeah. Will is better there.
quizzical face. Like he was just like, huh? And I was like, you just got to trust me on this.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean can here.
yes,
It means will here.
yeah.
And that's the long
Don't lock
process.
in the equal, this equals
I
that,
learned this
and
before.
therefore it's
Yeah, I
always
learned
going
this
to be
before.
that. And
Yeah, no, you did learn
yeah,
that before, and now it means
yeah,
something different because it's a new
right,
context. And that's really the long process of language learning and language development
right,
is like the constant new contexts that morph and just drift meaning into
yep,
new things. Yep. So,
right.
but it's the same as happening with grammar that there's just different phrases people use in situations, and you can't just apply a grammar pattern
Mhm.
willy-nilly and say, "Oh, I learned this grammar pattern. Let me use it wherever I want." Well, you're going to cause communication problems if it's just not conventional to where people would say that.
Right.
So, focus on form, I think, is general. It could be a mini lesson. It could be something quick, like what I think a lot of comprehensible input teachers call a pop-up.
Yeah,
Something quick
which
like
is my
that.
favorite.
Yeah,
Can we
yeah.
talk about
Let's talk
those for a
about
while?
pop-ups. Sure, pop-up grammar.
Yeah, pop-up grammar or pop-up anything. Like it could be, oh, did you notice the spelling here? If we're looking at a text, did you, yeah. Oh, what if I did this instead with this pattern in the
What would it
language?
mean?
Yeah. How could, what if I wanted to say this? How would we change this? That kind of thing,
Yeah.
like where the
Mm.
this is filled in for something specific about your language. Like in
But
Chinese, there's
but
ways
during,
to say,
yeah,
yeah, it's just like a little break. It's like a 10-second break or less, in my opinion. I'd keep it very, very
yeah.
short.
But you're saying
Like, what does this do there?
during some kind of discussion or during some kind of reading, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
often during reading,
Yeah.
not usually during just more oral language
Okay.
use, but
Okay.
sometimes it tends to be for me at least. Not that it is a rule that it has to be, but the idea of this is that here's my opinion about it. I don't know that it does anything at all for their language development. But what I think it does do is treats people like whole people,
Hmm.
and that they are bringing their curiosity or their puzzle to something about the language sometimes. And sometimes, so there's multiple reasons I guess I do it. But one is just that in a language classroom setting, a lot of times learners who are there um, think that they should be talking about the form of the language.
Hmm. Hmm.
and and by giving them that little bit now and again as it comes up, it's scratching that itch for them a little bit, those who have it.
Hmm.
And I think that is, it's not such a time or a distraction. It's not a whole grammar lesson. It's not all the things about this word or this form. It's about this right here, right now, does this for the meaning.
Yeah.
Maybe a little comparison of like, now, if we wanted to do this other thing with it, how would we have said that? And then
Sure.
like, yeah, so I like those kinds of things because I think it's solving for that analytical learner. And it's helping to alleviate the kinds of curiosity issues that I've seen learners like that have.
Hmm.
The other thing that I think it might do is kind of a statistical learning kind of a trajectory. So you're not telling them once and then now they have to practice it and now they're expected to perfect this. It's like noticing like, oh, when I had this la thing here in this sentence in Chinese, it added this sense to the meaning. Like, oh, there's a change of status. Now, next time we see it, oh, what do you think? What's that la's there? What's that doing there now? Well, is it change of status? Oh, well, this time not
Hmm.
quite as much. It's a little
Yeah.
bit, so like over time, you're giving them so many different little examples. It does this statistical learning thing where
Sure.
they're going to be able to draw some
Yeah.
conclusions over time,
Yeah.
long term,
Yeah.
if that's even a goal for you.
Sure.
And I think it's not. I think I see a lot of people who are comprehension based and communicative do that kind of thing, and I don't have a real problem with that. So
I because we in this very definition of what we're referring to, being focused on form, necessarily including the meaning, like you're focusing on meaning in that moment, then to me that's just part of the comprehensible part of comprehensible input. Like you're just making
very
the input
often,
more comprehensible in that moment. And we could say, oh, a little particle doesn't always have meaning. Okay, but what kind of function does it play here? Sometimes it seems to be truly like blank in terms of meaning. It's just required. And it's okay then to pop up, hey, notice this little thing here. It's just a
gotta have this
convention.
thing.
It's just a convention. It
Yep.
just needs to be there. And then it gives students a chance to say, can I leave it out? And you go, you just can't. You
Yeah.
just can't. And they go, okay. And that they might think of it then as a chunk. So I don't know about generalizations. Like I don't know what it does for their, I kind of don't
Mhm.
want them to make generalizations in the
Right.
over generalizing sense,
Yeah.
but little micro generalizations. I don't know how to define this right now. So I'm going to
Yeah.
leave that there
Yeah.
for
So
now.
like if there's like a continuum of like how much are we thinking about like how generalizable is this? How much close is it to just this exact specific example? I
Is
think
this a
maybe
weird example? Sure.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it's like it's pretty close to
Hmm.
the single example level.
Yeah.
And then over time they're kind of building up maybe a little bit of a sense of like, well, it could be this in these kinds of settings. It could be this in these
Yeah.
kinds of
Over
settings, but
time.
not like yeah, not like that's the goal that I need them to understand that today or
Well, that's
even
a good
next
point.
week.
I see this in classrooms a lot where a teacher will point out some sort of grammar thing with sometimes a little extra message where they'll say, okay, so remember, you always, you're going to see this, like always do this. And it's like, no, you're promoting an
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about.
overgeneralization. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I try to
Yeah,
rein
there
back. It's like it's like riding a horse and pulling the reins back and saying, like, okay, don't think that this is going to be this all everywhere. Right now, it
yeah.
means this. You will see this kind of context again, but just be aware that like it's just this here.
Yeah.
Not going to mean
Yeah.
this
So
every
it's
time.
enhancing the comprehensibility. Sometimes I think it could be useful for something that like I okay, it's my
Mhm.
maybe my sloppy way of doing something I think that Bill VanPatten was seeking to do with processing instruction, if I understand that right. Where, for example, it's known in research that it's often the case that a learner is not processing all of the linguistic information, if you will, in a sentence. They are picking out things. So like if somebody says, yesterday I went to the store, that word yesterday really clues in the listener that it's in the past. They may or may not have realized like that the verb change is something important to do there or something that it matches up with that because that yesterday is there. So their brain might not even notice things about form.
Yeah.
And so if you're wanting them to start to really perceive and process that form does that thing in this
Hmm.
sentence, you can do some his approach is a structured kind of a lesson that's designed to still be communicative, but to force the learner to interpret from that little bit of form that they might have
So you
overlooked.
might delete the word yesterday so that they can
Yeah.
only rely on the verb. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And then you have them
Yeah.
like look at a bunch of different kinds of sentences and say, okay, what happened last week for this person versus what they're doing next week or something
Sure.
like that. And then, oh,
Sure.
is this next week or
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
or last
Yeah.
week? And so then they have to interpret based on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
My and so here we go. Here's an opinion.
Okay.
My short version, my easier to plan version, my spontaneous as it arises in the time I think it might be useful or necessary is this kind of pop-up focus on form, where instead of doing a lesson where I'm trying to see, help them interpret what these particles do in the verbs in Mandarin, I'm just saying in that moment, okay, now what did that la thing after the verb do right here? Oh, what about this la that's at the end of the sentence? What do you think? Like those kinds of little moments, I'm like trying to make them see that they need to perceive there's a meaning there, and that meaning isn't just reading in from their first language what some equivalent should be. Like your student thinking that that word "hui" in Mandarin had to mean can, like to be able to do something, when in that context it was much more like will in
Yeah.
English, will
Yeah.
do something.
Yeah.
So, like, does that
Yeah. Yeah.
make
Absolutely.
sense?
Yeah. And I think
So try and get
also,
them to perceive it all
sure.
and use it for meaning.
Yeah. I think there's, this is a good segue into talking about the broadness of the idea that if you're drawing attention to some kind of form in an immediate context, so you're already reading something, you're already having a discussion, and then you kind of pause that discussion or pause that reading to focus on some kind of form that's right there in the thing you're reading or talking about, and talk about that form, talk about that meaning, that really opens it up to a whole lot of different possibilities for practices that, and it could be something where you're saying, look at this form, it look what it does for the emotion of the reading, look what it does for the
Yeah.
action. Is this person asking a question? Actually, they're not asking a question, they're just being sarcastic. Like, what is the
Hmm.
action being performed there? You
Yeah,
can
the
also
kind of
talk
the
about
pragmatics.
kind of pragmatics. You can also talk about, oh, this is a phrase that older people would say, and it marks them as old. So it's a sort of sociolinguistic kind of thing.
Dadgummit. Yeah.
Yeah, dadgummit,
Like
or
my grandmother's husband used to say dadgummit and was
yeah,
like, wow, I think I've heard that from
sure,
like old cartoons.
right. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
it
funny.
was like this is something that like yeah, so that kind of information I think can be useful to somebody who's a learner and like
Yeah,
oh, the impact of this word is really strong. Like
sure.
versus this one's more neutral.
Yeah, get that beautiful dog off the table versus get that mutt off the table.
Yeah.
Like there's loaded meaning in each of those
Yeah.
words for
Yeah.
a
And
dog.
then yeah, get that mongrel out of the
That
house.
mongrel, there you go.
Even worse.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah.
right. But then also there are things like intentionally repeating a word over and over. So would we count that as focus on form? I think that SLA researchers have in the past, like an input flood, I think was
Mm,
counted as focus on form. An input flood was
yeah.
not just any repeating of a word, as I kind of wished it would refer to. Input flood, I always see it defined. I think was it Sharwood-Smith?
I think so.
I think that
Michael
was the input flood, Michael
Sharwood-Smith.
Sharwood-Smith.
Maybe.
Um, I think so. So
We'll check
the
it out. We'll put it in
put it
the
in show
link.
notes. We might be wrong. So the idea of so input flood I've always seen defined in the SLA research as making some sort of form, could be a grammatical thing, could be a word, repeat a lot in a text so that the learner notices it and that the noticing is intended to promote the learning of that form. And I've
Mhm.
always thought, okay, mm, that's not the
Kind of
same thing
aligns with
that's,
pace in a way.
yeah,
Like,
yes, because it's about noticing and noticing promoting learning. Where to me, like I was watching teachers do comprehensible input things where they were targeting a word, but they were never saying it was so that the students just notice it and that the noticing causes the learning. It was more about they just need lots of exposure, and it's all that lots of repeated exposure that's going to allow their brain to build up a system for
yeah.
acquisition. And so, but I think that that input flood, by that definition that is used in SLA research, that is focus on form. I think I've seen it called that. We'll go back and check. But that means that if you say a word more loudly, if you pause before saying a
Mhm.
word, I think I would call that focus on form again because you're doing
Yeah, in
something
just the very mildest kind of way.
to pull attention onto that form. Yeah.
Right.
Now, I might look at the bigger sequence of what you're doing to think, well, wait, are you highlighting the form of the word or are you trying to be dramatic? Which to me would, it's possible that, people do pause before words and they're not trying to focus. If you just watch TV, there's some TV host being funny, they might be just trying to surprise the audience with the idea of what they're pausing before rather than like the pronunciation of the word or something like that. So it's not
Yeah.
necessarily that they're focusing on form. You have to look at the bigger context. But doing things like, doing a gesture while you say a word at the same time, that might be we might call that focus on form
Hmm.
because you're
Yeah. It's really
immediately,
micro level, but it's still
sure.
giving a little extra emphasis to some kind of thing in there.
Yeah, you're saying, notice
Yeah.
this form that I'm saying, It has
Yeah.
this meaning. You might do a little pop-up about just the meaning if have a new class and you're like, okay, well, yow. And you do a hand gesture and you say want, and you say, okay, yow, and you write it
Want.
on the board and you say this yow means want. I'm doing a hand gesture for want. That little sequence of things you do, I would call that focus on form because
Yeah.
you're pointing out the meaning, you're seeing how it's spelled, you're telling the
Yeah.
people what it means. Um, yeah, so I think
Yeah.
it can appear in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Do you want me to give another
Sure,
example?
sure.
So in story listening, that's developed by Beniko Mason, there is a lot of what you just kind of described. As I understand it, these are parts of some of the introduction. They're telling a story in a way that is relatively comprehensible to students. The goal is that they can follow the story meaning, maybe not every word at all, but they're getting the plot. And so as the teacher is telling this story, they're drawing and they're sometimes writing the word on the board next to known language of the students, and then they'll erase that known language and leave that word up there. So that is, I would say too, that's one of those micro moments of focus on form as
Yeah.
well,
Hmm.
where there's just a little bit of extra thing, or they'll talk about synonym stacking, where maybe you're introducing a less common term for something that's like brilliant, but you mean it to mean smart. So you say, he was brilliant. He was smart. He was intelligent, very smart.
Oh
He
yeah,
was brilliant. And
yeah.
then you go on. I would
Mhm.
call that too. That's like a little bit of a focus on form
Sure. It's
thing.
a little sandwich.
And
I would say
yeah.
that I do that with my daughter all the time, where she'll say, "What's
Mhm.
that?" And I'll say like, "Oh, that's a toucan. It's a kind of bird. It's a toucan is a bird. So yeah, it's a toucan."
Yeah.
And so I'll give the
Yeah.
some sort of general word, but I'm tying it to a word that I trust
She
she
knows.
knows so that she can, and it also offers her a sort of categorization system to say, oh, it's a
Mhm.
kind of this larger category in terms of
Right.
meaning. Yeah, I think those kinds of focus on those examples of focus on form happen a lot in just natural child development. And kids are
Mhm.
curious about language all the time. They want to know what things are called. They're
Yeah.
happy when they remember. They like saying what the thing is. There's something pleasing about being able
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
the
Name
names
it.
of things. Yeah, to name things.
Yeah. It's
So
interesting.
yeah, so I don't want to get hung up on this idea of like people have to be purely focused on meaning all the time and that that's
Mhm.
the 100% pure and only way to develop in a language. It's not what happens in your first language.
Mhm.
And not even I'm not just talking about school, like just kids at
Yeah.
home. We highlight things, we repeat things, we say things slowly for them. There's a lot of these
Mhm.
sort of subtle kinds of focus on form. I don't think I would call that focus on forms in the sense of
I agree.
like, now let me help you overgeneralize. Let me help you.
Yeah.
Let me like tell you that
Now,
this pattern that you have to like memorize now and then go apply
right.
everywhere. Right.
Now,
So
can I address one final pushback thing?
yeah,
Speaking of others with kind of a comprehensible input, kind of a mindset about
sure.
language learning and teaching, and that would be ALG, automatic language growth. I've talked with folks who do ALG, and this issue of this, I don't. They would advocate that you really language acquisition is such an unconscious process that you do not want to ever do this sort of attention to form, that you need to get the learner kind of in the unconscious brain. And my thought was like, but I meet a lot of learners that have this, but why is it doing that in that sentence? Or like, I thought you said this, like your student brought up, like, I thought it meant that. And so if you are forcing that person to try to mash down those points of wondering,
Yeah.
I think it's counterproductive. Just give them a little bit, and address that curiosity or that confusion point so that they can go back to attending to the meaning and to be really fully engaged with what you're doing as a communication experience in the classroom. So I don't know. The ALG person that I was speaking with at a table, a group of people about this, eyebrows went up, I think, is what the response was. We didn't talk about it further, but I wasn't saying that, oh, you got to do this because then that's the only way that they'll ever get that other thing.
Mm.
It's much more of a like, I'm
Yeah.
trying to look at the whole person and the whole situation.
Yeah.
And
We
give them
know,
psychologically what they need and
yeah,
not just linguistic fodder for their mental system to, you know,
yeah,
they're a whole person rather than just a language acquisition device in their mind.
yeah. I would also push back on the idea that people only naturally take in their input and then that input is just what their system is. That
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a problem.
overgeneralization is a natural part of the process of learning. And I'm going to say language learning, language acquisition. I don't distinguish those terms. Um, but not in the Krashen sense.
Right. Yeah.
Krashen defined as learning when he used the term learning, he was talking about really what I would call study. But I'm just talking about you get input, your brain does stuff with it. That's right now what
Yep.
I'm talking about. And when you get input and your brain does stuff with it, overgeneralizations are a natural part of that process. And so children overgeneralize pronunciations. They'll put S's at the ends of things where they don't belong. I see students in my classroom put duh in all kinds of places. I explained to my new ninth graders yesterday that this happens, and I said, don't try to make it happen. But the reason I see it happen in some students, not all students, is that from your perspective, it probably just sounds right. It just
Mhm.
feels like it should go there, and that's your brain overgeneralizing.
Trying to do
And
it. Yeah.
yeah, and so when I see that, and I told them, I said, when I see you do these kinds of things, I celebrate. I say that's language acquisition, and the IB calls their foreign not they don't call it foreign language, they call it language acquisition. I love that they don't call it second language acquisition because to me the name, I haven't verified what they intended, but the name implies language acquisition is just language acquisition. You just acquire whatever language, could be your first, could be your second,
You're
could be your third. It's
exposed to.
just a language and you're acquiring it. And language acquisition is really a term that comes out of the researchers who called their field second language acquisition. And also first language acquisition as well, child acquisition. So
Mhm.
it's going to go through messy stages where people do make overgeneralizations. So for ALG folks to say like, no, you just naturally get the input and then, you're getting this
Over
natural
time,
language,
it's yeah.
you're assuming something that
Yeah.
just doesn't seem to be true. Like
Yeah.
even if they're just getting input, they're probably making overgeneralizations along the way. And so
Yeah.
if you see them make errors that seem non-native like, maybe that's why they want you to wait a
Well,
thousand hours.
they don't want you to produce in the new
Sure. So
language for
maybe
a
they
very
want you
long
to
time.
like hide your overgeneralizations until your system is more settled.
Yeah, maybe so.
But children do it. Adults should be expected to do it. You're going to be, that was the significance of learners' errors was the name of the first SLA paper by S. Pitt Corder, and it's like we can use their errors to study
The
their
development.
what development, what's going on in their brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
A good reason why it's like, is that even an error? Is it like it's a developmental form? That's a term I
it's a
got out
better
of
name,
Bill
yeah.
VanPatten as well.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I like to call it something else. Yeah. Another thing, ACTFL has it in their recommended practices. They call it teach grammar as concept. And I had to really read their definitions to figure out what they meant by that. And
Yeah.
but it's the same thing. It's the same thing
Hmm.
again. It's that in the context of your communication, you're
Hmm.
pointing out some kind of form and pointing out what it means. And
Yeah.
so I think concept, I have a book that was through a book. It was sort of in the back. I got a book because it was recommended in the back of another book that we had as part of our training through IB schools. And it's called, we'll link it in the show notes, the concept-based curriculum, something like that. I'm probably saying it wrong. I'll search it and I'll give you the link. But yeah, it's really similar to having a thematically organized unit. The idea is that if you're just teaching skills and knowledge, that can be a very random feeling unit. And so by having a central concept, then everything can tether to that, and so you can keep everything connected. To me, it's the same intention as having an essential question, having some sort of theme for the unit. So I was wondering where ACTFL got the idea of teach grammar as concept. But if that's what you mean by concept, then it just means the little grammar thing you're pointing out is just connected to what you're doing in your unit. Um,
Hmm.
and so the meaning is going to be relevant to everything else, every other meaning you've been talking about in your unit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like it's a distinct thing that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Teach grammar as connected to your unit. Maybe that's what I would call that.
Yeah. Yeah. But and maybe and not as that focus on forms kind
Oh
of
yeah, that's right.
here's the
Well,
rule to
then
practice
your
or
unit
generalize.
shouldn't have grammatical forms listed as targets of as the goals of the
Of the
learning of the
lesson
unit.
or
That's
the
right. That's right.
yeah.
So if
Yeah.
it's about,
Yeah. It's just
fam
necessary to understand along the way
yeah,
to communicate we're going to use these, but it's not
yeah,
that's not the target of the learning itself. It's like,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, if your unit is about family meals and then some text about a family meal has a little grammatical thing, you're pointing it out because it's aiding the message about family meals. It's
Yeah.
not that that was a target listed and like, great, we got to this grammar point. Now let's just focus on this as this like
Yeah.
separate thing. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Unlearning these habits takes time
It
for
takes time and it's
language
also
teachers who are taught through grammar or who like that kind of thing,
who
like to
like
think
it.
about it.
Yeah. There's a sense of like panic. I think I've had this before where I'm like, well, but all the textbooks are organized that way. Who am I to question? And all the other teachers are following the textbook. Who am I to question? There's a imposter syndrome
Yeah.
feeling you kind of get where you're like, who am I to abandon all of what textbooks are telling us to teach?
Yeah.
Yep. So that's, I think we've kind of covered the whole
Yeah, I feel
span
good about that
of,
one.
yeah. So teach, so I guess a question in the end would be, is it necessary for language development to stop and do these little things? I don't think it's
Mhm.
necessary, but I think it can help. Anything that makes your language more comprehensible
Yeah,
helps you
that is
connect form
a
with
positive
meaning.
good.
It's a
Mhm.
positive good. And so I would say that it's probably beneficial
Yeah.
to stop and
And
point
I
out
and I
this means this. Yeah.
yeah, and if nothing else, I think for some learners it addresses that kind of sense of curiosity that they
Yeah.
might have. And so it's psychologically satisfying, even if it's not related to the language system that's
Yeah.
developing.
Well, and
That's
it's,
kind of my thinking
yeah,
too.
and keeping it limited also unburdens the students who didn't care about it.
Yeah,
Because not everyone
exactly.
in the
Limited
room,
like
like
5 seconds. Yeah.
fives. Yeah, if you can keep it real short.
Yeah.
Okay, that was good. I think we did it.
Yeah.
We solved focus on form. We did it.
It's yeah,
It's all
okay.
solved. Okay, that was good fun.
That's tongue in cheek, folks.
I know, tongue in
Okay.
cheek. Yeah, not at
Yeah.
all. I didn't mean that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for
See
listening.
you
We
next time.
appreciate you. Okay, I've been Reed Riggs.
And I'm Diane Neubauer.
All
Bye
right,
bye.
thanks for listening. Bye.